All right, it seems like it's time to start the January 15th meeting of the Board of Harbor Commissioners. Mary, if you would call the roll, please.
Frank Kelly.
Present.
Will Anakushin. Betsy Kramer. Present. Charles Watson. Absent. Ken Owen.
Here.
All right. Mr. Bridley, are there any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, we have no changes this evening.
All right. At this time, we would take public comment on anything that is not on the normal agenda. I don't see anyone to make public comment, so we'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the November 20th meeting. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes. We're off to the director's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This evening I'm just going to briefly try to go through an overview of the city's budget for the fiscal year 2010. And I'm going to ask Scott to put up a couple of slides that will, I think, help us walk through this. These were attached to your agenda packet, and a little bit of background on January 8th, the City Council held a work session and was presented very similar information, if not exactly the same in terms of this attachment to your report. And as all of you know, the state, the cities, the counties throughout California, and for that matter throughout the entire country are suffering in the throes of this recession and difficult economic times. And no surprise, those economic times have come home to roost as it relates to the lack of revenue coming into the city of Santa Barbara. Again, this is a general fund overview. Scott will be going over our waterfront department mid-year with you on the agenda later. If you look at this first slide, this is the projected deficit and balancing strategy for the general fund for the fiscal year 2010. And all of you know that begins in July of this coming year, goes through the balance of 2009 and into 2010. I'm just going to touch on some of these key points because it would get a little too detailed. The important part to look at is the changes to revenues. And these changes are based on the fact that the city is now projecting to receive significantly less sales tax revenues to the tune of almost $2 million. Property tax less so, approximately $375,000. TOT is transient occupancy tax, or the bed tax, charged on visitors that stay in our local hotels. That revenue reduction is down just over $1 million. There will be some benefit not only to all the city departments, but even us enterprise funds relative to overhead, as the city will begin to charge less overhead to those general fund departments and spill over to the enterprise. So this is actually a positive number. Year-end variance means expenditures versus revenues, and they project that they'll have less revenue and more expenditures than they had anticipated. And as all of you know, the interest income earned on saved money or invested money these days is very small in terms of percentage interest, and therefore projecting about $675,000 less. Some miscellaneous revenue shortfalls for a total of about 5.7. Along with the downturn in the economy, obviously there are departments that are getting less fees and revenues coming in as part of their programs. Community development that has a number of permits, plan check, development fees, and park and recreation relative to programs which they operate. There's a shortfall estimated of about $1.6 million for that fiscal year. The police generate significant revenues from parking violations. I guess the good news is less people are getting parking violations. And the even better news is they're not allowing those violations to double or triple by not paying them on time. That's where a lot of the revenue actually comes from. And so they anticipate almost a $500,000 reduction in parking violation revenues. I mentioned the reduction in interfund charges or overhead allocations, less revenue again coming into the general fund, and other changes for a total of about $2.5 million. That would total about $8.2 million for the fiscal year 2010. And if you, I skipped over the top part there. There's also a projected deficit for the end of this fiscal year that we're in, which is 2009, of about $2.5 million. So when you combine the combination of those numbers plus the additional savings of about 2.2, the city is projected to have a deficit of somewhere around $8.5 million. They've also included a buffer or a cushion of another $1 million, saying that that could grow to 9.5 by the end of next year, not knowing how quickly, if at all, the economy will rebound and we will see an upturn in both sales tax or transient occupancy tax. So that basically is an overview of the projected shortfall or deficit the city will be facing for the next fiscal year beginning in July. And if you look at the next page or the next the backside of what's attached to your agenda packet, there's a balancing strategy that's being discussed in all city departments as to how we can address these shortfalls in a way to make a balanced budget. Again, these are not recommendations. These are not cast in concrete. These may not be the way that the balancing strategy actually comes forth over the next several months, but these are the ones that are being currently discussed or evaluated. The potential measures are listed on the top here. They are the first subset is what we call one-time fixes. These are monies that are currently available that could be used on a one-time basis to help balance the budget. There is a reserve of about $1 million in workers' comp that could be used. There is a capital program within the general fund of just over almost $1.9 million. There is street sweeping funds reserves of about $500,000, and then a City Hall allocation fund that's used for a variety of different improvements here at City Hall. All of those dollars could be made available to assist with the balancing strategy. What's being recommended is only $795,000 of the capital program to be used as part of the strategy. They feel that those other one-time monies, if they were to be used, is really, I think the term was, kicking the can down the road. It really only tells you that in the next year you're going to have to find a different way to solve that problem. So they're not recommending that those funds be used. What they are recommending is that the citywide, the city take on possible labor measures such as furloughs or limitations on cash outs or people actually having reduced hours that would result in salary and benefit savings. And that's been estimated to be somewhere around $1.5 million. So on the one-time measures or maybe a furlough that would be used as part of next year's fiscal year, about $2.3 million could be generated from those type of actions or expenditures. Ongoing type of savings that they are looking at or funding shifts that they're considering involve maybe continuing the furlough program beyond a 1-year type of situation. Revenue enhancement measures such as going to the voters and asking them whether they'd be interested in increasing, say, a quarter or a half-cent sales tax here locally, changing the bed tax rate, increasing the bed tax rate. All of those would be enhancement measures that could provide additional revenue. None of that's been determined. None of that's really been discussed or anticipated at this time. Structural changes is estimated that there could be savings as much as $500,000. Structural changes are typically when the city general fund looks to other enterprise programs to pick up program costs. We're familiar with that. That occurred several years ago when they shifted some of the park and recreation landscape maintenance costs within the waterfront to be paid for by our department. Similarly, there are other departments such as the enterprise of the downtown parking program that could pick up some of the ongoing maintenance costs for State Street and the landscaping in and around the downtown streetscapes. So there could be funding shifts similar to the downtown parking program, or again, additional structural changes or shifts to the waterfront program or other enterprises. ICS fund, where a 7% rate adjustment would be realized, be about $500,000. Again, this is that overhead allocation that I mentioned previously. And then probably the largest looming budgetary strategy or fix to come up with what will be needed for that $8.5 to $9.5 million shortfall will be actual targets to the general fund budgets, which means all departments which are funded, police, fire, library, community development, park and recreation, will be looking at a cut of over $6.3 million, and that could be as much as $8.3 million, depending again upon how well the next 6 months of our economy and revenues shape up. So all general fund departments are now looking to reduce expenditures within their departments in the amounts of about $6 to $8 million. What this would do then is generate sufficient revenues or cost cutting to address that $9.5 million budget shortfall. They're putting cushions on it, meaning that it may not be as much as anticipated if the economy recovers sooner, or it could get worse. And so they're asking for departments to look at not only 6.3 but possibly 8.3. So they'll have a contingency plan of about an additional $2 million should that come to be needed. I mentioned in my director's report to you there will be discussions probably over the next several months that we will be probably a part of and we will participate in. We will bring them to the commission as we know more about them. If there is targeted program shifts from other enterprise or from other general funds to our enterprise. And I would anticipate that will happen sometime, maybe as soon as February, but definitely by March. So we will keep you apprised of that. So I wanted to just touch base on that. That's not obviously the big picture. That's kind of the quick overview. But I think it is important that we begin to be aware of the fact that the city, along with many other cities and counties and states throughout the United States, are facing budgetary shortfalls due to lack of significant revenues. So the next item that I had to report to you is not something I think you're unfamiliar with, but just wanted to clarify it. As you know, Commissioner Watson's term on the Board of Harbor Commissions did expire last December, in December, and Mr. Watson, Charlie, was unable to actually attend or complete the application process due to an emergency, and he could not interview before the City Council. So he was not able to actually complete that process and be potentially reappointed to the board. the way the process then works is the city clerk contacts the board member or committee member and asks whether they'll be willing to serve in that capacity until there's another recruitment. Charlie has indicated a willingness to serve in that capacity until the next recruitment. Next recruitment is scheduled in June of this coming year. So at that time, he can reapply and go through the process. I think he's indicated an interest to do that. And that would be the next time we would be looking at filling that vacancy or having the appointment process completed. And with that, I would answer any questions that you might have either on the city overview or regarding Charlie's continuation to serve on the board.
Mr. Bridley, were there a couple other council actions there on my about the executing the agreement with DBAW and the Santa Barbara Sailing Club?
Yes, thank you. I skipped over those. The two items that have gone since our last meeting to the City Council would be the agreement with the Department of Boating and Waterways accepting a $15,000 grant that we use for disposal of abandoned watercraft here throughout the waterfront. And an item that did come before you previously, and that was the 7-year lease with the Santa Barbara Sailing Club, which the council also approved since our last meeting.
Any questions for Mr. Bridley? All right. Thank you, Mr. Bridley. We're off to the Facilities Management Report.
Good evening, Chairman Kelly and Commissioners. Despite quite a bit of interest in an upcoming project at Stearns Wharf in the City Pier, we only received 2 bids. Fortunately, for the project, we received a very low bid from the Schott Construction Company of $98,000 to replace piles, deck boards, pile caps, and stringers on the City Pier, Travel Lift Pier, and Stearns Wharf. The project's going to begin next week on the 20th at the City Pier, and it'll be comprised entirely of night work, beginning at about midnight and continuing till about 11:30 in the morning, in order to keep the pier open during typical business hours to accommodate commercial fishermen, research vessels, and oil rig support vessels. It's going to take about 6 weeks to complete the work on the City Pier and a little bit of work on the Travel Lift Pier, and then they're going to move on over to Stearns Wharf. Stearns Wharf is a relatively small project this year. We've got about 4 piles to drive at night and another 4 to drive during the day. As you hear every year, the Stearns Wharf pile driving project is included annually in our capital improvement program. The work on the City Pier and the Travel Lift Pier was in the 2009 and 2010 capital improvement plan for $80,000 each year. Fortunately, we had a very limited scope of work on the Stearns Wharf project, and we included the Harbor Pier work with it. And we received such a low bid that we're going to go ahead and hopefully complete all 3 facilities this fiscal year, which will obviate the need to have any work done on the City Pier next year, which should result in a bit of a savings. We had an estimate of about $180,000 for labor for all these projects, and with the bid coming in at $98,000, it's just reflective of the very competitive bidding climate we have these days. We also finished the fall cycle dredging of the Federal Channel in November. AIS Construction Company is in the 2nd year of a 3-year contract, and typically they remove about 120,000 cubic meters of sand each cycle in the fall and in the spring, but they only remove 51,000 cubic meters this fall. There was very little sand available. They removed a tremendous amount last spring, and there were virtually no swells and very little sand on the sand spit in the fall. That's typically kind of the feeder beach for the Federal Channel, which is kind of good because when we move into the next cycle, we'll have, fortunately, enough money. The federal government is operating under a continuing resolution for this fiscal year 2009, and that means that they fund about 80% of the budget that was adopted in 2008, which was about $1.8 million for Santa Barbara Harbor. With such a small amount dredged in the fall, there should be adequate funds for the spring, and then hopefully in 2010, the federal government will adopt a budget and with adequate funds for dredging for Santa Barbara Harbor again. And finally, we had 7 contractors attend a pre-bid job walk and received 6 very competitive bids for the 3rd phase of the Breakwater Cap construction project. Lash Construction Company submitted a low bid of $573,000 to construct the final 18 panels at the very east end of the breakwater. This is $130,000 less than our estimate of about $700,000, which is very reflective of a very competitive bidding climate. We had 6 bids, all of which were very, very low. It was very surprising. Construction is tentatively scheduled to begin in March and be completed by the middle of June, similar to what we did a couple of years ago. As you might recall, we moved this project up 1 year because the Marina One project has been postponed a year. The project will allow access to the breakwater up to the construction area. Once in a while, it'll be closed the entire way just for construction access and delivering materials. But last time we did this, it was very successful, and the public was able to enjoy the breakwater while construction went on. Phase 3 will complete the straight section of the breakwater. The final Phase 4 is the remaining curved section that's just south of the yacht club, adjacent to the yacht club, and it's in much better shape than the rest of the breakwater cap. We eliminated Phase 4 from the capital improvement plan, the one that I brought to your attention a couple months ago for fiscal years 2010 through 15, due to lack of need and lack of available funds. It's a fairly expensive project. But we'll be considering it in the outlying years of the next capital improvement program that will go from fiscal years 2012 to 2017. This concludes my report this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Are there any questions for Carl? I have one question, Carl. The little viewing area that's out at the very, very end next to Breakwater Section 3, does that need any remedial attention at this time?
Chairman Kelly, you're referring to the Lost at Sea Memorial?
Yes.
It was constructed in 2005. No, it's in great shape. There will not be any access to it during construction, but it'll last about 2.5 months, and the public will be able to go back out and enjoy it again.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If there are no other questions, we'll go on to the Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, it seems like quite a while ago, but I'm happy to report on the Parade of Lights results. We had a good time again this year, as we do every year. 19 boats competed in the parade, and it was a crystal clear, beautiful night in early December. And it was followed, of course, by a wonderful party at the Endless Summer Bar Cafe, and preceded by the typical Santa Claus event. And the children and Santa Claus go right to dark. They seem to bond to that event, and we're actually going to try and keep Santa there a little longer next year because that part of the event gets more and more popular each year. I must apologize, though. I just noticed when reviewing this report today that I had a misprint in there, and the vessel that I named as the grand prize winner was actually the winner of another prize. It wasn't the Oso Loco. In fact, it was the Maria del Mar, Captain Gaetano Moreno, that won the grand prize, and I apologize personally to Captain Moreno. And he was the lucky winner of an overnight stay at the Harbor View Inn and a haul out at the boatyard and a lay day in the boatyard. So congratulations to him. Overall, it was a wonderful event, and of course, we always look forward to doing it in the coming year. I have a couple of Clean Marina related things that I'll be quite brief about, because next month I anticipate bringing to you the annual Clean Marina program report. But we do have a new sewage pump out boat in the harbor. In fact, it's the first sewage pump out boat. We've been talking about it for a long time and waiting for somebody to step up with a good boat and a good business plan. And I think John Payne, well-known rigger at the harbor, who has the business Mobius Rigging, has done so. He has a boat he's named the Mobius II. It's a refitted 13-foot Boston whaler equipped with a 150-gallon tank, and he's been in business for 2 months, and in that 2 months he has pumped out approximately 150 gallons. He's averaging 150 gallons a week, excuse me. It's about 5 boats a week. And he expects that to go up because Docklines just hit the streets, and there's an article in Docklines about his service. And he's been receiving, I spoke with him today, he's been receiving a lot of calls. So we're really happy to augment our stationary pump-out system with John's business, and we'd like to give him all the support possible. If you want to get in touch with John to schedule a pump-out, which can range from a standard pump-out to a pump-out and freshwater wash to a deodorizing, chemical treatment, you can get a hold of him at 805-708-2427. Again, for the Mobius pump-out service, you can call John Payne at 708-2427. In another clean water item, you'll hear a little bit more about next month, the Waterfront Department has for many years encouraged the use of biodegradable soaps for washing down boats in Santa Barbara Harbor. It's been an educational effort for us for some time, and just recently during revisions of the city stormwater prevention, pollution prevention plan, the Regional Water Quality Control Board asked us to add that as a mandate in our slips, and so what we've done is we've amended our marina regulations to require that the washdown soaps be biodegradable soaps. The good news is they're available at most grocery stores, of course. West Marine and other chandleries carry them, boat stores carry them. And we're working heavily on the education end. When we make contacts with folks, we're making every effort to advance this knowledge to them so they can help keep these pollutants out of the harbor. They're not the phosphates that come with typical soaps that are non-biodegradable really aren't what you would call contaminants. In other words, they don't contaminate the water, so it's unhealthy for, say, human contact. But they are, in fact, pollutants that do impair the water quality and water body, and that is what we're trying to focus on here to maintain our clean harbor. And finally, in a couple of events that have sort of a clean marina twist to them, we had a couple of boats sink in the harbor over the last month, which really isn't that common, but I'm pleased to report that the response to them was excellent, and the pollution was kept to a minimum between the use of absorbent pads and containment boom. Both cases were almost identical. One was a visitor, 26-foot visiting lobster boat. The other was a 28-foot power boat. And both of them sank in the night and were hanging by the cleats in the morning. And between quick action by Harbor Patrol and the Coast Guard and Salty Dog Dive Services worked a full day on each of those two, got them floated, got them over to the travel lift, and got them hauled out into the boatyard. All's well that ended well on both those events. And I'm reminded of many years ago when I first took this job, a sunken boat in the harbor was an absolute nightmare, and we threw up our hands and didn't know what to do. But I'm pleased to say that the coordination relative to the pollution and the contractors we have available who understand how to salvage these boats and float them safely has improved greatly. So I guess it's a sad news story for both of them, but a good news story as well. There didn't seem to be any foul play involved. One boat apparently sank from a lazarette that filled and pulled the stern down, and the rest of the boat went with it. And the other, from what we can tell, had a bolt rust out that was attaching the swim step to the stern transom area, and water entered through that hole. And it's a typical same kind of thing happened and went down stern first, from the best we can tell. And that, Mr. Chair, will conclude my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mick. Are there any questions for Mr. Conlon? Mr. Anakuchin.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Anakuchin, no, I can't. All I can tell you is that what the people who are promoting this notion at the regional board tell us is that they're neutralized in the water column and lose their ability to pollute or impair the water body. That they break down, basically, in the water. Unlike phosphates and what have you, which typically don't, my understanding is, don't have a habit of breaking down nearly as fast, if at all, and help to contribute to algal blooms and what have you. That's the limit of my biochemical knowledge on that.
You want me to say that all over again since this thing wasn't on? No, let's not do it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. It'd be worth investigating that, because there's something about the law of conservation. We don't lose mass here anywhere. Soap goes in, something comes out.
Any further questions for Mr. Conlon? Mick, I have one question. It seems like I have the questions tonight. If so, on the biodegradable soap mandate, if boaters would like to dispose of their old soaps, do we have any collection points, or are they supposed to use them up and then go to biodegradable soaps? Just clarification.
Mr. Chair, thank you. That's an excellent question. My respectful suggestion would be to hang on to them for our hazmat disposal day or use them at home or another facility that, I mean, ultimately that goes to the sewer where it's theoretically treated, not directly into the bay. But use them in another location, not in the harbor, or save them for our hazmat disposal day. I would do the former if it was me.
Okay, good. And I just wanted to also, I have been very eager to see someone try the floating or portable pump out, and so I'm very glad that John Payne has taken the bull by the horns. We'll use no other analogies. New business.
License agreement with Santa Barbara Youth Sailing Foundation. Recommendation that Harbor Commission recommend council approve a 5-year license agreement with one 5-year option with the Santa Barbara Youth Sailing Foundation for a 2,500 square foot water space in Marina One at a base rent of $595 per month.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the Santa Barbara Youth Sailing Foundation has been providing, is a local nonprofit that's been providing boating education and experience opportunities for local youth in the harbor since 1968. The foundation leases 2,500 square feet of water area in the harbor in Marina One, adjacent to the gangway. And the current license agreement is rather old and outdated. It dates from 1985. It's also an evergreen agreement, meaning it renews itself automatically forever, unless terminated by either party on 180 days written notice. So essentially it's a 6-month lease that just keeps on going forever and ever unless it's terminated. The foundation, Kent Pierce and Chris Gabriel came to speak with us on behalf of the foundation. They're planning on replacing their docks, a much needed project. In the course of our discussions, Carl and I and Mr. Gabriel and Mr. Pierce, we decided it was also and agreed that it was also an opportune time to upgrade that rather outdated lease, bring it to current standards with the current insurance requirements, and hold harmless and all the little legal details, but not really change the business terms per se. So we came to an agreement on a 5-year lease, or license agreement technically, with a 5-year option. Gives them more of a real lease to work with than a 180-day rolling lease. It's at the existing rent of $595 per month. There is no percentage rent because it's not a commercial lease, of course. And it has a little bit of a different rent escalation clause. That $595 gets increased whenever slip fees are increased and at whatever amount slip fees are increased. So it's keyed into slip fees rather than all of our landside leases, which are keyed into a cost of living increase based on the CPI. However, that tying it to slip fees is not uncommon for our water area leases. Other water area leases such as the Marine Mammal Center, the Santa Barbara Dry Dock, and the Sea Urchin Harvesters Dock there, formerly known as the CUDA Dock, those all are keyed in on a slip fee type escalator. Other than that, there's not a lot to say about this lease. It's a small operation. It benefits many local youths over the years. And they are using a lumber alternative for the decking. I believe it's Trex. I think it's a recycled plastic material. So it has a longer lifespan than wood, and it's a lumber alternative. So it's somewhat of a environmentally friendly alternative. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Commissioner Watson.
Mr. Chair, Scott, I think that the terms of that lease are a sensible solution to it. You mentioned that the foundation is a nonprofit and fully funded by itself, with a great deal of help from the Yacht Club, which is supports their efforts, but is obviously a separate entity. And the Yacht Club Women, that's their primary charity that they raise, charitable funds in order to help finance the Youth Foundation program. And the program, by the way, includes scholarships that are made for disadvantaged children that otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to experience the sailing experience. And so I just thought that was worth commenting on.
Thank you for adding that.
Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, hi, Scott. I was interested that this is their dock, and does it have to meet city specifications, and how is it designed? Is that usual to have an organization provide its own dock? It shows more my ignorance of how this works than anything.
Commissioner Kramer, there are a number of waterside facilities in the harbor that are responsible for their own facilities, from the piles to the dock structure. Sea landing being a good example. Also the dry dock. Those probably being the primary examples that come to mind right off. Oh yeah, Skip's operation at the Sailing Center. He rebuilt all those docks back in 2000, pilings and everything. So it's not uncommon for a water area lease type situation.
It shows my ignorance, and I think so. Thank you.
Commissioner Owen.
Looks like the discussion's over, and it's a wonderful organization. I've liked their work. I like the idea of getting rid of evergreen leases. It's nice. I didn't know we even had any left, but this one's not too dangerous, I guess. But I'm still glad that we've renegotiated that. And with that, I'd move staff's recommendation.
Is there a second to that movement? Second. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Number 6, the mid-year budget review.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review a status report on the Waterfront Department fiscal year 2009 mid-year budget revenues and expenditures.
Apologize for that. We'll cover revenue first in two different ways. First, we're going to cover the revenue that we've received year to date in terms of how it ties out with what we budgeted, what we anticipated we'd bring in. And then we'll look at revenues in a second way where we compare it to where we were at this time last year. We'll compare fiscal year 09 revenues to fiscal year 08, and then wrap up with a review of the expenses year to date. This is the first table that appears in your packet. It shows revenue at the program level, and this is basically projecting how we expect to come out at the end of the year. And what we do is we take a 3-year seasonally weighted average of the past 3 years, and we come up with a percentage of the revenue. We divide the actual July 1st through December 31st revenue by that ratio to come out, to extrapolate out a projection for where we believe we will be on June 30th of 2009. So if you start off with the property management program and you go across that top column there, we're pretty much on target actually in the property management program. We're about $70,000 ahead of budget. We're expecting to end up there at the end of the fiscal year, about 1.7% ahead of budget. And of course, I want to qualify all of this by saying that's if this trend continues as it has the first 6 months of the year. As we all know, anything could happen, but this is our best educated calculation, extrapolation of where we're going to end up. Financial management, that's our interest. It's a small number, but again, it's tracking ahead of expectations. When we look at parking services, that appears that we'll finish the year about 3.2% below our budget expectations, or about $60,000 below our budget expectations. That's not too far off. The big issue is really in the marina management program, where we're running about, again, if the pattern holds true, we're running about 5.8% under budget by year end, or about $294,000 off. We'll talk about why this is in a moment, but in the aggregate, that looks like the department would finish out about 2% under budget. And on an $11 million budget, that's only $229,000. So I guess if there's good news in this, that's the good news. We're in a far better shape than the general fund, far better shape than many other municipalities at this point. Again, if the trends hold through. I will add, to put this into perspective, however, that we generally finish out the year $200,000 to $300,000 over our revenue projections. So, you know, this showing up in the negative to the tune of $200,000, that's really probably more like a $500,000 variance. So we'll continue to monitor this closely. So back to the problem in marina management, it pretty much all ties out to slip transfer fees. That's the big story. Most everything is tracking pretty steadily, but obviously boat sales have declined drastically. We see that in our percentage rent reports from our brokers in the harbor, and we've seen a big drop in slip transfer fees. For example, in fiscal year 2007, half of the way through the year, we'd achieved $306,000 of revenue. Last year, we had $338,000 in slip transfer revenue by this time, and this year we've only seen $169,000, and we really should be about double that, about $340,000 as of December 31st. So that's really what's throwing our entire budget out of whack. Okay, just shifting gears a little bit, this is a different way of looking at the revenues, and this is comparing the revenue fiscal year 2009 actual revenue for the first 6 months to fiscal year 2008 revenue for the first 6 months. And again, I won't go through each of these line items, but we're performing less, not surprisingly, than we were this time last year. I'll point out just a couple of the areas of concern that we're monitoring closely. Again, I won't go through it line item by line item, but if you look at the second row, the food service leases, we're looking to be about $55,000 off for the first 6 months of this year. In an effort to bolster that, you might recall in November I reported out to you that we've gone in on a cooperative effort with the Harbor Merchants Association on an advertisement televised in hotel rooms designed to attract hotel visitors to the harbor. We've just embarked on a similar program with Stearns Wharf Merchants Association, a cooperative effort with them to develop an ad through Cox Media. They start filming tomorrow, and the wharf merchants wanted to, their philosophy is that most hotel visitors are going to come to the wharf anyway, so they're not going to focus their target audience on hotel visitors. They're going to focus it on Cox channels in the local area from Carpinteria to Goleta. So we're trying to throw some property management advertising money at these programs to try and help the tenants out a little bit and help ourselves out a little bit with these revenues. Moving on to the parking comparison again, first 6 months 2009 compared to first 6 months of 2008. Some of the line items are up, some of the line items are down. The one we're really looking at closely is waterfront parking permits. It's not a big number. We're down $8,000 compared to the first 6 months. Again, to bolster sales of the water, well, part of the problem with the waterfront parking permits is every year for the last 6 years, City College has purchased 200 permits from us in January. That's a $19,000 shot in the arm. For the first time in 6 years, they have informed us they're not going to purchase any of the permits from us. What they were doing was purchasing blocks of them, subsidizing them, and selling to their students, faculty, and staff at a discount to encourage their students to park in our lots versus theirs, where they're so heavily impacted. So with that $19,000 shortfall that we're not going to see, we did start a modest advertising campaign for waterfront permits to try and bolster those sales. We have a few ads running in the Santa Barbara Daily Sound and the Santa Barbara Independent, and then we've taken advantage of some free opportunities that we have, such as City TV and the annual city news report that comes out with your water bill. And I will also add to that since this report came out between January 1st and yesterday, January 14th, we've sold $96,000 more in permits. And then to wrap up on the marina management side of the equation, again, we spoke about this. The main thing we're hurting here is on the slip transfer fees. And again, last year we were at $338,000 at this time. This year we're at $169,000. So that's about 100% off. Most of the other programs are performing on budget, and so we don't expect much improvement in the slip transfer fees by the end of the year, given the state of the economy. Moving on to expenses. This slide is expenses listed by program. I'd like to just put the caveat there that these are preliminary expense figures. The official expense figures were not released by the Finance Department until this Tuesday, January 13th, so we had to develop these in-house, so they're not exactly right, but they're pretty close. So we just wanted to get these in front of you in time for this meeting. For the most part, 50% of the way through the year, our expenses are running below 50% expenditures levels, with the exception of administration and community relations, which were about 54% expended. I'll explain a little bit more about that on the next slide. Some of the smaller programs, such as property management, financial management, parking services, and marina management, are at or under the 50% level. And our large programs, harbor patrol, harbor maintenance, wharf maintenance, where the big money is, those are running at 49% and 41% respectively. So those are well under budget. Altogether, the department has expended about 48% of its expenditures, 50% of the way through the year. Now, I want to qualify that because that actually overstates our expenses somewhat. For example, those figures, that 48% figure includes encumbrances such as the Work Incorporated contract and the Service Master janitorial contracts. And what that means is, for example, the Work Incorporated contract is about a $200,000 contract that we pay on a monthly basis as we go through the year. But on July 1st, that entire amount is encumbered, so it appears on the books as though that entire amount has been expended. So that's why I say when you see that we're 54% and we see that we're 48% expended, we really aren't quite that. It's overstated because some of these are encumbrances rather than actual expenses. Additionally, in the administration and community relations program, there's a $421,000 one-time charge, which was a transfer from the operating fund to the capital fund to fund our capital projects. And again, out of the administration program, there's a $688,000 expense in there that represents our entire fiscal year 2009 principal payment on our debt service. So our debt service is extracted from our account a little differently than your home mortgage might be. Instead of paying 1/12 of it every month, it comes out in big chunks. A good example of this would be if and when we get our contract and our loan finalized with the Department of Boating and Waterways, it's collected in one lump sum. The entire debt service payment is collected in one lump sum in August of each year. So a little different than your home mortgage type situation. So again, those expenses are for the most part overstated, and we're well under our expense budget and should finish the year underneath our expense projections. That really concludes the report. I'll just speak briefly about the 2010 budget review process. We will be discussing budget issues with the Harbor Commission Budget Committee, Commissioners Watson and Kelly, in February. We will bring that information to you, the Commission, at the February 19th meeting. On March 2nd, we're scheduled to review the 2010 waterfront budget submittal with the City Administrator and his staff. And we expect to be able to bring a budget recommendation before you for your consideration at the March 19th meeting, to be filed with the City Clerk in April. And then typically the Council conducts budget hearings for each department throughout the month of May in anticipation of final adoption of the budget in June. So that's where we are at mid-year, and a glimpse at the process for the 2010 budget review process. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott from the commissioners? Oh boy, I seem to be the only one, Scott. So here we go. A quickie, a couple of quick questions. I noticed that, and I don't know if you have any answers, but they just struck me. The Ledbetter under parking, the Ledbetter Beach lot is off apparently significantly more than any others. Do we have a notion of why in the percentage of revenue that it's down?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The Ledbetter lot hosts a number of large events in the springtime. Typically, there's a outrigger canoe race where they have vendors' tents and they rent the entire lot and the Ledbetter Park. And so we rent the entire lot to them for these events. And so we should be seeing some, unless they cancel the event this year, we should be seeing some significant springtime revenue from these events that'll hopefully bring that number more into line.
Okay, so it's delayed as opposed to lost. At least we hope that's what it is.
We hope.
Okay, then there's a miscellaneous up under, don't know which category, property management. There's a miscellaneous revenue that seems to be off a lot, and I wondered if you could clarify a little bit of what is in that category.
Property management miscellaneous revenue includes everything from lease audits, where we may collect some back due rents and so forth. In this case, it included last year a $100,000 advance payment, if you remember, from Voyage Partners when they paid their 5-year lease up front for the vessel Philippa. And this year we expect a similar payment from NOAA for the vessel Shearwater right next door. So we're expecting another $100,000 from them, and we're crossing our fingers it hits the budget by July 1st.
Okay. And then one last, and I'll be done. The Yacht Club hoist. I'm unfamiliar with why it was so, why it looks so odd. We had a very large fee collected in 2008, and so far a pittance in 2009.
Mr. Chair, the Yacht Club hoist is a pittance. It's $100 and something a month. It's I'm sure that there was a mistaken journal entry, and there's some money that got into that account that belongs somewhere else. We don't even have a budget number on there. So.
I was going to say, how did we get $13,000 one year and $800 the next? I mean,
no, there's got to be, a few $100s of something else that mysteriously got into that account.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no further questions. Wow, I guess we've heard the report. Mr. Bradley, do we have any communications for the staff?
Before we move on to communications, which actually I just have one, that budget report that Scott gave you, or mid-year review, was a precursor to what we'll begin to get into over the next several months. And we wanted to make sure you understood to a degree where we think we might finish the end of the year. And albeit it's not the best of years, it's not the end of the world from the standpoint of loss of revenue. We think there can be some minor adjustments relative to expenditures that will easily make this a balanced year, if not surplus revenue overall, but certainly not what we've seen in the past, and that's to be expected given the economy. We won't go into that detail over the next couple of months. I mean, I think this is the background that you needed relative to where we expect in the end of the year. We will focus the next several meetings on what the budget should look like for 2010, both in terms of are we comfortable with the revenue projections that we historically have used over the last several years? Do we think that trend is going to stay, or will it drop? The good example is this slip transfer thing. If boats don't sell, slip transfer fee revenue is going to be minor over the next several years, where typically it's $600,000 annually. The other thing is we'll have to probably revisit the capital improvement projects, given that we always try and balance this budget not only with what we're going to do in 2010, but where we want to be 5 or 6 years out. We don't want to be spending next year to a point that it's a detriment to look at all of the needs that we have from an infrastructure standpoint. And I would expect, and I've given direction to the division managers and supervisors, that I expect that their budgets are lean and mean, if not reduced, from previous years. Now, when we bring that to you, you may choose to differ, meaning you think those programs are important or those projects should stay in the budget, and we'll have to have that debate, if you will. The other thing you should begin to think about is that we had projected to move parking rates from $1.50 to $2 in 2010. So that's a 50-cent increase per hour. We are not increasing the annual permits over the next year or two. We're nervous about that, so I'd like you to begin to think about that. We don't want less people coming, because if less people come, we generate less fees, the businesses have less revenue, and overall we don't do as well with our annual revenues overall. So I would like you to begin to think about those going forward, and we'll get into the details next month.
All right. Thank you, John.
Frank?
Commissioner Kramer.
At what point, Mr. Bradley, do you expect to have to deal with the departmental target adjustment? I think that's the way it's phrased.
Commissioner Kramer, we won't have a target because we're an enterprise. So we get to set our own targets from that standpoint. What we will probably get is a glimpse at how much money they might like to shift to the waterfront department or other enterprises. I would expect that that number will be available by February. If it's not the exact number, it may be a plug number, which would mean it's going to be in the ballpark of X, and therefore we should plan for X, and maybe it'll be Y or something that going a few months further before the City Council adopts the final budget. So I will have a plug number by February.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're up to Commission staff communications now.
Right. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I believe that the Harbor Commission meeting for February falls on, Mary, help me, the 19th. I unfortunately am not going to be here. I would like to be here for the budget deliberations. So if it's possible, we would like to consider moving that date either 1 week forward or 1 week backwards, whatever might be better for the commissioners. We don't need to decide that tonight. Mary can certainly do some phone calling and checking for your schedules, and then we can set that date and time. My son will be in a Junior Olympic swim meet in Bakersfield, so I'm going to try and make that.
Congratulations. I have one item on the Commission staff communications. There was a lease agreement that was in our previous packet, the Minnow agreement, and it didn't show up in this one. Is that one still under consideration, or approximately where is that?
Chairman Kelly, that's in a state of hiatus at this point. We had a sit-down meeting, supplied them with a draft lease, Jeff and his wife, Gretchen, and they came back with some suggested changes. I got them a second draft back in July. They've had several issues. One is they want to get clearance from the health department as to what they can or can't do with that new space. They submitted preliminary drawings to the EHS, got them back. But I don't believe they've had the opportunities to submit their revised drawings to County Environmental Health. So they have that hurdle they want to jump before they commit to the lease. In the meantime, they lost some part of their property in the T-fire, which has been occupying Jeff's time. And so we're in a hold status with that. And I'm just giving Jeff his space until he gets things cleaned up there in Sycamore Canyon, and then we'll bring that to you as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to know where that had gone. Any further info? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second? Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.